back to the Tales of Agmar podcast, which, for those of you that need a quick reminder, it's a fresh take on both science fiction and fantasy storytelling, as done by me, Sinjin. I'm the author, and thanks so much for coming by for the second episode of the cast. Today we're going to talk about the Middle Kingdom, which is the exclusive high fantasy faction with inside Tales of Agmar, of course on the planet Agmar. And this might end up being more of a two-part thing. For what we're going to do for today's cast is I want to talk about the political structure of the Middle Kingdom, and that's going to include me talking about the Nobles' War, the Colony Rebellion, and what the current Middle Kingdom colonies look like. We're going to talk about kind of their technology level, which of course is going to be fantasy-based. And then we're going to go into what their military structure looks like, and quick little glance at the gear blades, which in the future I will make a separate podcast for, just because they're a group that has a lot more lore going on with them, a lot more stories than the standard Middle Kingdom military. And then to cap it off, we're just going to do some everyday life for a citizen of the Middle Kingdom, and then that's going to be in both the main continent and the colonies, because we'll of course get into that in the intro, but sorry, not in the intro, after the intro. But there is like a main continent that has the capital and everything else, right? And then they've got colonies on a different continent. Now, to talk about the political structure and really the history of the Middle Kingdom, because basically to understand why it's set up politically how it is, you got to understand the history of this faction. I need to talk a little bit about how the geography of the world of Agmar looks. So, the world itself has got two main continents, and then a variety of islands and island chains that are scattered around. And then it's got a north and a south polar regions, kind of like ice caps mixed with some, like actual continent. It's just most of it's ice. Now, we're going to focus in on one continent, which I just referred to as the Middle Kingdom continent. Before the Middle Kingdom existed on this continent, there's just a whole bunch of fiefdoms, right? And just for a quick recap on fiefdoms usually have like a lord or knight, and that lord owns the land around the fiefdom, right? They've got some sort of keep or heavily armored center, right? And that's where they live. And all around, and on all the land around that, you've got a bunch of serfs or peasants. And these serfs, they don't own the land that they live on, the lord does, right? But they get to work the land and grow their food on it in exchange for like sending a bunch of food to the lord. And in exchange for all that food, or other materials they might be mining mining or gathering, right? Then the lord's main job is going to be the protection of that fiefdom, right? And so this is what we had. Now, how things usually go, like in a situation such as this, you get these lords, they want more land, more people under their control. They want to expand, right? And they're going to go and attack their neighbor with their knights, their peasant infantry, and hopefully take that over. Well, this slowly starts happening, and two different kinds of coalitions start to form. One coalition where a couple royal houses come together for defense, and another coalition where a bunch of royal houses have either been absorbed into or taken over by some more powerful noble house. Now, we're going to focus in on the house of Dralin, and that's going to be important later because they become the main rulers of the Middle Kingdom. But they form one of these coalitions with the houses around them, so like their neighboring houses, their neighboring fiefdoms, in order to protect themselves from the other fiefdoms, the ones that are going to want to come in and destroy their crops, their food, right, livelihood, peasantry, dismantle their, basically, absorb them into their growing empires. So, things that's going on, a lot of smaller noble houses just joining up with different places getting conquered, wars, defensive maneuvers, reclaiming the land you lost last week, and etc. The other noble houses also form into these larger blocks. And this ends up becoming the upper kingdom, the middle kingdom. You can kind of see what I did there. But you might be thinking I'm going to say the lower kingdom. We did not have the lower kingdom. Instead, we had Drow's Republic of Man. Right? And now this is going to be a little bit different than the two other kingdoms that formed, right? Those two are kingdoms. This one's a republic. Okay? And that's a republic that was more set up by peasantry. That doesn't really show up much else past this point, except for in little flavor bits of lore, because obviously they get destroyed and the Middle Kingdom ends up ruling the entire continent that's, used to be the Upper Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and Drow's Republic of Man. Now, the sense of having wars for a very long time, kind of intermediate wars, very disputed history. In some future day, after I finish the main books for Tales of Agmar, I might go back and write like a tale of the noble wars or something, and it will feature some of these smaller groups that I've made a little bit of. We'll probably talk more about Drow's Republic of Man, etc., right? But for right now, we're just going to focus back in on the Middle Kingdom. They came out on top of all of this and ended up controlling the entire continent. And with controlling the entire continent, right, you've got to set up some sort of structure so that you are able to, effectively govern that and use that continent to the best of your abilities. Now, all the houses decide to stick together. They don't break apart and instead form this sort of union. I'm going to talk about it, right? So there's 5 houses. You've got the House of Dralin. You've got the House of Carmere, the House of Blackthorn, the House of Mornbright, and the House of Winholt. Now, starting back at the top, House Dralin is that one we're focusing on. They are the main ruling house, and they're also the house that has the connection to the Gearblades. So a lot of, pretty much every noble member of House Dralin becomes a Gearblade at some point, and is either taught by like a fellow House Dralin member or some other Gearblade member. Now, since I'm talking about membership within the Gearblades, anyone can join, but you have to have a certain affinity for like magic. Basically, I'll go more into that later when we talk about the technology. But House Dralin has a special deep connection to this magic, and that causes more of them to be able to reach that Gearblade affinity. Now, House Carmere, they take care of farming and logistics, like land shipping mostly, in terms of those logistics. Yeah, I've got another one that covers sea, obviously. But right, like if you've got a bunch of farms, or you've got food tax and whatnot, right? Or if you're trying to get materials from point A to point B, you're going to be talking to some noble member of House Carmere. And then we've got House Blackthorn. They're in charge of military matters. So they're in charge of conscripting / recruiting for the military. They're going to take care of all military training. Obviously, they do not have direct control over Gearblade deployment. That ends up being House Dralin's speciality / capability within this government structure. And a little side note about them, they are the only noble house that allows non-nobles to end up joining their house, and that's usually done through combat. If you get enough combative accolades, you get promoted to a knight, which then gets you into House Blackthorn. And so they're kind of the largest, but also most susceptible to losing all of their nobles' house, which is why they're kind of big. And back during the Noble Wars, they actually like had the biggest military to start out with and have like the best military doctrine out of everyone else, and have like the most effective tacticians, etc., right? Like they are just used to teaching their offspring the art of war. Now, House Moonbright is in charge of, sorry, not Moonbright. House Mornbright is in charge of negotiations with the group. So they're taking a lot more diplomatic stance, which is the exact opposite of House Blackthorn. So whenever these 5 houses come together for meetings and whatnot, House Moonbright is almost always at ends with House Blackthorn. And that's pretty much all House Mornbright does. Sorry, I changed some names because I thought they sound cooler, and they do. They do sound cooler than the old names, but I get confused sometimes. But anyways, mostly what they end up working with, like currently, like right now in like quote unquote present day, which would be where the book starts, which is a whole thing. They are mostly negotiating between the main continent and the colonies, and just like taking care of, like taxes, make sure that goes back and forth and whatnot, and kind of keeping the theocracy at bay. We'll talk more about the theocracy in the next batch of episodes. The last one, so I don't get hung up on talking to you about all the little finer, smaller details of each house. Speaking of which, if you guys ever want like a deeper in-depth of something, just say it, and within my normal recording time, I'll like make a bonus episode, or if it's that big, I'll create like a whole new episode for it and write a script for it, whatnot. Just that you guys get the kind of information so that you know like what's going on, right? Because I know I have a lot, and I cover at a very like kind of grazing the surface level, just because I want to save most of it to be unfolded in like books or other literature, and I don't want to bog this down, but I just still want to keep you guys all on like the same page as me, kind of, if a page had multiple pages in it, I guess. Anyways, I'll stop getting distracted with my grandiose ideas of explaining things to you guys and just keep going. So House Winholt, they're in charge of the Navy and maritime trade, right? So what I mean by maritime trade is they're like the shipping on the water, right? So, and if you're also wondering, yes, this is for the Middle Kingdom, this is all still like Age of Sail. And so you've got, riggings, lines, all of that you have to take care of. They're teaching their offspring to be captains of those boats and first mates, right? And then taking care of the trade, as well as any water fighting that needs to be done, or coastal bombardments, etc. Now, there's a type of school or academy, whatever you want to call it. I guess it's more like a boarding school, so yeah, it's an academy. Well, we'll see. Believe it or not, it does not have a name yet, because I've not named it in the book yet. It's still called like Noble Academy or something. But anyways, that's a spot for the noble children to go to in order to learn more just like general governance over the kingdom. And that's in the capital city. And what that, of course, allows to happen is, as they go through this, then it's kind of more of like you treat that more of like for in the U.S., like a high school, like a full 4-year high school is basically what the academy would be. But that obviously allows for mingling between different houses, so you can like get political power there. Sometimes becomes a little bit of political play who you end up sending, because not all houses send all of their potentials to this academy. They just usually send the highest ones, unless of course your House Dralwyn, which, even though they're kind of the smallest house, they have like the biggest political sway. And so, for instance, in the present day narrative of it, and this is kind of going into the book, but that's all right, since you guys might not read that for a second with all the edits that I'm making. Princess Kandra is the only heir to the throne in the house of, House Dralwyn. There's nobody else that's coming of age, and there's like basically nobody else except her and her mom, and like they're like advisors and staff and whatnot, right? But none of those people can technically ascend to the throne. Her father's presumed dead because he died in the last skirmish with the theocracy, and that leaves her as kind of like a political bargaining chip with different houses, but also leaves her as like a target for other houses in this academy, and that will get talked a tiny bit about in the book. Well, not a tiny bit, obviously, but yeah. Now, to round this off, let's talk about the capital city, and that is Dralin Keep, and it's kind of a interesting concept that I'm going with. If you think sort of like big, stony metropolis that's obviously still medieval, so like, Lord of the Rings, those human cities that you like read about in the books or see in the movies, right? That's basically what I'm going for here, is this very fortified city. It's got multiple walls. The actual keep itself sits on an island in the middle of a lake, and the only way to get to that lake is a very long bridge. There's actually no boats allowed on this said lake, and it's all walled off around it. So it's like a huge wall, gate, bridge that has a lot of like 90-degree turns and forces you to take kind of a while to get there, with multiple gates along those straight edges, so that you have to pause, leaving enemy units open to archer fire, or, as you'll find out later, ballista fire, because I like ballistas, and so does the Middle Kingdom, consequently. But anyways, that is it for kind of the history and military structure. It's mostly just, for a quick recap, it's really just a monarchy that has a little bit of an organized house system that divvies up, divvies up like the workload of, military, navy, farming, negotiations, and standard, like big decisions across 5 houses. They meet together quite often to discuss what's going on in the kingdom and to make decisions. And then, of course, underneath them is a number of like lords. Well, sorry, I guess not lords underneath them, because the other 4 houses would have lords, but underneath that is a lot of like governors, peasants, soldiers, tax collectors, etc. Thank you so much for listening to the first part of this episode. While recording, I did decide that I should do it in 2 parts, just to help break it up for y'all. But next week we'll come back with that part 2. And if you guys have really been enjoying part 1, definitely feel free to comment what you like so far about the Middle Kingdom. And if you're new here, feel free to drop a follow so you can continue on this journey with us. And we will see you next week.